But we begin with the freeze on federal handgun sales. It takes effect today. Will this reduce gun crime in Canada? Minister of Public Safety Marco Mendicino joins us from Surrey, British Columbia. Minister, I'd like to start on the handgun freeze announced today. I'm wondering what you say to the argument that criminals aren't legally buying or selling the handguns they're using, so all this does is make life harder for legal gun owners.
I'd say look at the statistics, and behind each of those statistics is a human life lost, a family that has lost a loved one. And I've met with those individuals. Just yesterday, I was in South Simcoe in the Barrie area in Ontario, where we grieved at a funeral for two officers for the South Simcoe Police, Constables Northrup and Russell. And today's announcement is a historic and a significant step forward when it comes to responsible gun control in the form of the national handgun freeze. Now, what is the practical impact of that? It means going forward, it will be illegal to buy, sell, or transfer handguns. And the effect of that is to reverse the trend of a growth of a type of gun that has become the #1 homicide gun killer in the country. Why? Because for the last decade, we've seen 45 to 55,000 new registrations per year. So we're aiming to reverse that trend, and we're doing a lot of other things as well, like investing at our borders, giving CBSA additional tools, also advancing a prevention strategy through the Building Safer Communities Fund, working in close partnership with organizations like the ones we are with today here in Surrey, BC, along with the Prime Minister. So a long way to go, but we owe it to victims to not accept the status quo and to keep pushing forward.
You know, the Parliamentary Committee studying this move and studying your firearms legislation, they were hoping you will accept amendments that will have carve-outs for members of sports shooting clubs and things like that. I mean, is this something you're willing to consider in amending this handgun ban?
Well, I'll come to the amendments in a moment, but first, let's just take a step back. David, we're the government that has done the most progressive reform when it comes to introducing smart, sensible gun laws. 2 years ago, we introduced a national ban on assault-style rifles because they have no place in our communities, and we're going to make sure we get them out once and for all with the buyback program. Today, we introduced a national handgun freeze. So when it comes to the amendments, the potential amendments of Bill C-21, what I've said is that I'm prepared to work with parliamentarians of every political stripe, and will allow the committee to study the issue carefully, independently, and we'll keep an open mind about what recommendations are put forward.
Okay, but on the assault style ban, I mean, you know, you've got the premiers of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, New Brunswick. I think it's Yukon that has also said they're not going to enforce this. They don't want their policing resources to go to it. And today the Prime Minister said they're engaging in the worst kinds of politics by opposing the use of the RCMP and municipal police forces on this. I mean, is the Prime Minister politicizing things with language like that? How do you get around this and actually get this enforced?
Well, first, let's just recognize that the vast majority of Canadians actually support this policy, because these guns were designed with one purpose in mind, and that's to kill with the maximum amount of lethal force in the shortest period of time. We've seen that happen in Canada, in Portapique and Truro, in Quebec, in Montreal. And we owe it to those victims and the families to make sure that we have good policy when it comes to getting those guns out of our communities. Now, I will say, I met with my provincial and territorial partners last week, and I clarified, and I think they accepted, that this is going to be something that we have to work on together. Firearms is a matter of federal regulation. The RCMP, with whom we are working to implement the buyback program, is a federal entity. And I am sensitive to the concerns around operationalizing it and resources, but let's make sure that we are, in step with where I think the government is at and where Canadians are at, which is that assault-style rifles have no place in our communities. We've got to work together to get them out once and for all.
Right, but if these provinces don't want the contract police forces, the RCMP, to do this, are you going to pay for extra police resources? Will the federal government pick up that additional tab?
Look, we already have robust relationships and cooperation in place when it comes to supporting provincial and territorial governments. And what I have said is, look, I'm all ears. If the provinces want to talk about ways in which we can provide support, then let's get down to the nitty-gritty of that. But let's also be clear that there is complete and total consistency with saying we want to maintain public safety and getting assault-style rifles out of our communities once and for all. That's where I think we're going to have the most amount of constructive space, is making sure that we launch this program in an effective way. And again, we want to make sure that we're preventing another tragedy from occurring, the likes of which we've seen caused by assault-style rifles in this country.
Okay, I want to get into the nitty-gritty of the Emergency Act inquiry, if I can, and I want to go to some documents and testimony. We've seen documents that on February 6th, CSIS advised officials that there were no foreign actors identified in the supporting or financing of the convoy. And we heard from OPP Superintendent Pat Morris saying there was no evidence of extremism associated with the convoy. Don't those findings undercut a central argument your government used to use the Emergencies Act?
Well, first, I think it's important for you to remember, and everyone to remember, that findings will be made by Judge Rouleau, and he is in the course of hearing from evidence not only from law enforcement actors and national security actors, but from various officials and government officials, including ordinary people. And I want to underline that in the early days of this commission, what we have seen is robust evidence about the extensive damage that the illegal blockades caused right across the country to workers, to families, to young children who were trying to get access to chemotherapy, who suffer from cancer. And it is because of those factors, and that we were confronted with an unprecedented public order emergency, that we had to invoke the Emergencies Act. Now, the commission will take a look at those circumstances, and as I've always said, the government will cooperate, and we'll take whatever lessons that we can from Judge Rouleau once he makes those findings and recommendations, so that ideally we never have to use the act again.
But you, the Prime Minister, others cited foreign money and cited extremist ties in making the case for using the Emergencies Act. And we now have a senior superintendent in the Ontario Provincial Police and CSIS, your own national security agency, saying that neither one of those things were a significant factor at play. So how do you square that circle for us?
Well, they were a factor. And I will say that in the fullness of the commission, you'll be hearing from me and from other federal colleagues about the many ways in which we were looking at all of the facts. And yes, we were very concerned about potential extremist rhetoric that was inciting the illegal blockades. I've made on a number of occasions the point that what sparked the so-called Freedom Convoy was a call to the Governor General to either force the government to revoke vaccine mandates or to force it to resign. You had the likes of Pat King, who was affiliated with the leadership of the convoy, saying that the only way this is going to end in bullets. And just yesterday, you heard the evidence before Judge Rouleau that hundreds of criminal charges were laid against those who refused to leave despite being asked multiple times by law enforcement to vacate areas that were adjacent to critical infrastructure, including the seat of the federal government in the nation's capital, where on Wellington Street it was virtually ungovernable for 3 weeks. In the end, it was the government's decision to make. We made it because it was necessary. We used it in a targeted, time-limited, and charter-compliant way. And now we will cooperate with Judge Rouleau to take whatever lessons we can from it, so that ideally we never have to use the act again. Okay,
I want to touch on one more topic, and this is another inquiry, the one happening in Nova Scotia about the shooting that happened there. And the opposition today, Raquel Dancho, is calling for Bill Blair to step down, calling for RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki to resign over the comments that were released in the audio recording of the phone conversation she had, where she said the minister's office requested information be released publicly about handguns and linked it to the handgun legislation and the freeze that you're announcing today. I mean, based on what you've heard there, how is that not political interference in the operations of the RCMP?
Well, first, let's go back to that difficult 2 days in Nova Scotia. And naturally, Canadians were grieving alongside those families in Portapique and Truro to get as much information out as possible. And it was up to the police to make the decision about what information would be released and when. And, just to fast forward, we saw the RCMP do that job in the case of James Smith Cree Nation, leveraging various channels with social media, with press conferences and the like, building on some of those difficult lessons coming out of Portapique and Truro. But I would just say, having looked at the transcript, that I think it demonstrates what I think the commissioner has already acknowledged was a difficult conversation, one in which she's expressed some remorse for, but also that there was no political interference from the government. And we will always
like
respect
political direction, does it not, Minister? When she says this was a request from the minister's office, does that not look like political direction from your predecessor, Bill Blair?
Well, as I said, first and foremost, we always respect operational independence. And secondly, naturally, not only the government, but all Canadians were interested to learn as many facts as possible about what had happened, because there was the potential and the risk, and indeed the reality that a killer was on the loose, David. But we always respected operational independence, and now we'll continue to work with the Commission in Nova Scotia to, again, derive whatever recommendations and lessons we can so that we can make sure this kind of tragedy never occurs.
Why, Minister, and I don't want to belabor this, but why is a politician requesting anything in a police investigation other than maybe a briefing on what is happening and efforts that are being taken? Why are they requesting anything be released in this? Why is a politician sticking their nose into this in the first place?
Well, sorry, but we in the government speak all of the time with law enforcement, and there is a natural exchange of information. We have to be briefed about matters that pertain to public safety and national security.
Accept the briefing, but requesting the release.
Sorry, but if I could just complete the thought. We don't live in silos. We don't live in silos, and I have an obligation, the federal government has an obligation to share what information we get from law enforcement so that we can reduce potential risks to public safety. But at all times, when we're exchanging that information, we're doing it in a way that is respectful of operational independence. And I would say that I think the transcript validates that. But going forward, the most important thing for families to know is that we're with them, we're supportive of them. We want to make sure that we get some lessons and some recommendations out of the Mass Casualty Commission so that we can prevent this kind of mass casualty from ever occurring again.
Okay, Minister Mendicino, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to get the opposition's reaction to all of this. Raquel Dancho is Conservative public safety critic, and Peter Julian is the NDP's House Leader. They're here with me in studio. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you.
Thank you for having us.
So, Ms. Dancho, I want to start with you. The government says that given the rising use of handguns in violent crime, this ban is necessary. You don't agree?
We don't agree that it will work. We've been consulting experts across the country for the past year at Public Safety Committee, and police across the country have told us that the problem is not with legal gun owners, it's with those who smuggle guns in from the United States to use in criminal and gang activity. So this bill only impacts legal owners. It does nothing to attack the problem, which is illegal gun ownership from the U.S. smuggling.
But on that point, the Prime Minister said today, and Minister Mendicino did, they put $300 million in the last budget to help the border service agents with that. They've intercepted twice as many guns last year as they did the year before. So they are doing something about that part of the problem.
They are spending significantly more money. The latest estimates for their confiscation regime, for example, put it at $5 billion that it will cost the taxpayer. They're putting a fraction of that amount of money, as you've just mentioned, in the border and at the community level to support at-risk youth, which is where the root of crime comes from. So we would be putting that money at the border, in policing, and at the community level to support at-risk youth. Mr.
Julian, what do you think of this freeze? Do you think it goes far enough?
Well, we think it took far too long, absolutely. The Liberals promised to do this years ago, and the fact that they're finally putting it into place is welcome. Safety has to be our primary concern as Canadian parliamentarians for Canadian families. So safety has to be paramount. It is one tool among many, and the reality is we still have the flood of illegal weapons coming across the border, and the Liberals have done very little about that. They do talk about the money they invest, but as we found out in so many other files, they put money that doesn't actually ever reach the frontline workers, frontline border safety officers on the border. And so that is something where the Liberals have to act. And we will continue to push because we believe safety has to be paramount. One initiative is good, but there are a number of other initiatives that they should be following up on.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.